I made a terrible mistake by secretly exploring the idea of an open relationship. And now I desperately want my wonderful boyfriend and the life we built together back. I'm a year-old woman, and my boyfriend, who I'll call Ben, is we started dating when I was, and he was just kids in a way. But what we had was special from the start. Over time, we built a solid foundation of love, friendship, and respect that I'd always imagined would lead to marriage and a family. In my mind, he was my forever partner, and I believed he felt the same way. After being together for over 3 years, Ben and I moved in together after he graduated from college. Since then, we've made a great life as roommates, best friends, and romantic partners. He's my rock, and I've always been completely infatuated with him. I thought we'd be engaged by now, but I understood his desire to establish himself first. He's hardworking, kind, and level-headed, everything I could ever want in a partner, and I would never risk losing him over something foolish. Or so I thought. The trouble began when a new colleague joined our company. Egrininte. He was charismatic, athletic, and I admit, attractive. He had that easy confidence of a former professional athlete, and he took care of himself. As part of my job, I was responsible for getting him up to speed and handling his training, which meant we ended up spending quite a bit of time together. At first, I thought nothing of it beyond work, but Jay's life was different in ways that intrigued me. He was married, but his marriage was open, something he revealed casually in one of our conversations. Jay and his wife had a child together, though she still saw other men, including her ex-husband. Jay himself continued to have relationships outside their marriage as well, which was part of their agreement. I found this revelation surprising. I'd never known anyone personally who lived like that. And honestly, I was both shocked and a little fascinated. Jay asked for my opinion on open relationships, and I didn't hold back. I told him I couldn't imagine sharing my partner with anyone, and I'd never want to be with another man. He didn't seem bothered and just casually replied, "Well, let me know if you ever want to try it out. I think you might change your mind." I laughed it off, thinking he was just being flirtatious. But it planted a seed in my mind. Weeks went by, and the more time I spent with Jay, the more I began to feel a spark. I couldn't deny that I was physically attracted to him. We started flirting here and there in ways that felt harmless at first, but grew in intensity. And although I knew it was risky, I kept convincing myself it was just flirting. Deep down, I knew I couldn't discuss any of this with Ben. He's a firm believer in monogamy, and even something as innocent as flirting with Jay would have hurt him deeply. But curiosity began gnawing at me. I wondered if, somehow, he'd be open to the idea of an open relationship if I introduced it gently. So, one evening, I decided to test the waters by bringing up the topic. I told Ben about Jay, mentioning in passing that he was in an open marriage, and that his wife even continued to see her ex-Ben's reaction was immediate and intense. He looked disgusted. He told me he couldn't imagine any man allowing his partner to be with someone else and expressed some pretty harsh judgments about Jay's wife. I laughed along and quickly changed the subject, realizing how firmly Ben stood against the idea. I thought that was the end of it. I really did. While Ben was away on a business trip, things with Jay took a new turn. On Tuesday, during our lunch break, Jay and I were openly flirting again, and before I knew it, we found ourselves alone in his apartment. I crossed a line I never thought I'd cross. We were intimate, and afterward I felt immediate regret. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was just a fleeting mistake, but I couldn't shake the guilt. The physical experience was nothing like what I shared with Ben. There was no emotional connection, no depth. It felt hollow, and I knew I had made a terrible error in judgment. By Thursday, I had decided that my fling with Jay was over. I told myself it was a one-time thing that would stay in the past. But then Thursday came, and once again we ended up at his apartment. This time, I barely felt anything at all. The spark that had seemed so enticing was nothing compared to the warmth and love I had with Ben. I vowed that day that I would never stray again. Little did I know, the damage was already done. When I came home that night, I was surprised to see Ben standing by the door. He had returned early from his trip, and something was off. I tried to greet him, but he held me at arm's length. Then he said something that shattered me. Jay's wife had messaged him, suggesting they meet since Jay and I were now involved. She had even provided him with details about what had been going on. Apparently, she and Jay enjoy involving other couples in their open marriage lifestyle and assumed we'd be interested. My heart sank. I couldn't believe that this was happening, that I had allowed my relationship with Ben to get to this point. As I tried to explain, Ben silenced me. He handed me an eviction notice he'd printed himself. I had days to move out, he told me, and he'd be staying with his parents in the meantime. Any hope of reaching him or mending things was gone as he walked out the door, leaving me sobbing and alone. I spent the entire night trying to reach him. I even called his mother, hoping for some support, but she cut me off, telling me I was no longer welcome in their family. I was devastated. It felt like my entire world was collapsing. I couldn't imagine my life without Ben, yet my actions had made it clear I hadn't valued him enough. The next day, I waited outside his office. Eventually, he came out and got into my car. For an hour, I poured my heart out, telling him how much he meant to me, how deeply I regretted my mistakes. He listened, but his expression remained cold. He told me plainly that cheating was a deal breaker for him, and our relationship was over. I begged for forgiveness, but he was unyielding. As our conversation ended, he told me he'd cover his share of our expenses for one more month to help me transition. But after that, I was on my own. I asked if I could hug him, and he agreed, but he wouldn't let me kiss him. We embraced for a long time, and I clung to him, hoping he might change his mind, but he gently pulled away and left, leaving me in tears. I'm sharing this here because I don't know where else to turn. I'm ashamed, heartbroken, and at a loss. I've read stories from others who managed to mend relationships after infidelity, and I wonder if there's any hope for us. This was a one-time mistake, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to win him back. I'm looking for advice, particularly from women who've been in my situation and found a way to rebuild trust. Update. After weeks of pleading, I had to face the reality. Ben wasn't coming back. I eventually quit my job and moved back to my hometown to stay with my parents while I get back on my feet. Living in the same city as Jay was too painful, and I couldn't afford to stay there alone. I'm heartbroken, feeling as though I've lost my chance at a happy future. Finding a partner may not be hard, but finding someone like Ben, someone as loyal, loving, and committed is rare. Every day, I'm haunted by what could have been if I hadn't allowed myself to stray. My grandmother used to tell me that they say that finding a truly great man is like discovering a diamond in a coal mine. My mother used to tell me that all the time, her voice heavy with both hope and caution. If you're lucky enough to find a diamond, she'd say, don't take it for granted, hold on and cherish it. She had seen too many people take love for granted and walk away, only to regret it. She often reminded me that my boyfriend was my diamond, that he was the type of man most people dream of meeting, and for a while, I believed her completely. I really thought I'd found a one-in-a-million love. In hindsight, though, it seems she was absolutely right about him, but wrong about me. My ex-boyfriend is now doing incredibly well. Without me, he's thriving in his jobs, living his best life, and moving on without looking back. Meanwhile, I've been stuck in this cycle of reaching out, attempting to rekindle something to somehow make things right. I even tried reaching out over the holidays, sending a few messages just to check in, but he never replied. Not once. Eventually, after weeks of feeling ignored, I gave up, finally accepting that he had closed the door for good. Right now, I'm grappling with a deep sadness. Depression, if I'm honest. I've started individual counseling, and it's helping me confront the choices I've made and the regrets I carry. I've realized so many things about myself, my weaknesses, my flaws, and the parts of me that I kept hidden, even from myself. And in this journey, I want to address something here because it comes up often in communities like these. The idea that once a cheater, always a cheater, people throw it around like it's a universal truth. But in my case, it isn't true. I made a terrible choice, but I know with absolute certainty that I'll never cheat again. It's something I've learned the hard way, and I know it with every part of myself. My counselor even told me that most people who cheat don't repeat the mistake, which has given me a sense of hope that people can grow and change. For those who've been supportive, thank you. Your words mean more to me than you know. And to those who judge, well, I understand. We all make mistakes, but sometimes learning from them is the only way we grow. The mistake, let me take you back to the night that changed everything for me. I'm a year-old woman, and at that time, I was in a relationship with a year-old man I thought was my soulmate. We'd been together for 2 years, and in my mind, he was the one I'd spend my life with. But relationships are complex, and ours had hit a rough patch. Things had grown predictable, dates felt routine, and I couldn't shake this craving for something spontaneous, something that would make me feel alive again. One night, my friends invited me out, and I figured a night on the town would help clear my head. We went to a lively bar, and it felt amazing to be out, dancing, and letting loose. For a while, I was able to forget about all my relationship worries. That's when a guy approached our group and started dancing close to us. At first, I didn't pay much attention, but eventually, he worked his way toward me, trying to make conversation. He was cute, charming, and I let myself get carried away in the moment. He asked for my number, and even though I gave him a fake one, I felt a thrill, a kind of forbidden excitement I hadn't felt in a while. As the night went on, another guy from his group started talking to me. He was friendly, but there was something vulnerable about him. He mentioned he had just ended a long-term relationship, and out of curiosity, I asked him why. He told me that he felt trapped, that his relationship had become routine, lacking excitement. Those words hit me hard. I hadn't even realized that was exactly how I was feeling too. We bonded over this strange, unspoken sense of restlessness. And one conversation led to another. Before I knew it, I was at his place, and we were talking into the early hours. I told myself it was harmless until the moment it wasn't. We kissed, and from there, things spiraled. The next thing I knew, I had done something I could never take back. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming, but somehow I managed to fall asleep there, lost in this sense of panic and self-loathing. The next morning, I rushed home, heart pounding as I walked in the door. My boyfriend was waiting for me. He asked where I'd been, and I lied, saying I'd stayed at a friend's house. I went to shower, hoping to wash away the regret. But as I finished, I saw him standing there, waiting. He had read my messages and knew the truth. I tried to deny it, to explain it away, but he wasn't having it. He told me to leave, his voice ice cold, and when I reached out to hug him, he backed away as if he couldn't bear to touch me. It's been days since that confrontation, and I'm barely functioning. I can't eat, I can't sleep, and I've missed classes. I even pushed my friends away, partly out of shame, and partly because I blamed them for outing me. But deep down, I know this is all on me. The empty apartment, I kept hoping that maybe he'd reconsider, that he'd let me explain. So a few days later, I went back to our apartment. But when I opened the door, the place was empty. My heart sank. Every piece of furniture, every picture frame, every small token of our relationship gone. It was as if he'd erased every memory we'd built. My laptop, which he'd given me as a gift, was gone too. I felt like a ghost, walking through a shell of what had once been our home. I tried calling him, but he didn't answer. It was clear he had wiped me from his life. Eventually, I found a way to contact him. He was distant, saying he'd moved on and had no intentions of coming back. The laptop was legally his, he said, and he'd wiped all my files. I felt gutted, realizing that, to him, I was nothing more than a painful memory to be deleted. The revenge story, this story of regret, isn't just mine. I know others have felt it too. Here's another from my past, a story about betrayal from the other side. I'm a year-old man, and years ago, I was in a marriage with my college sweetheart, Rebecca. We married young, but as I pursued medical school and she worked her way up in accounting, things changed. She started working for an old friend of mine, James, and slowly, she drifted from me. Little by little, I noticed the distance growing. Then one night, I saw her dancing with him at a bar. She had told me she was home, but there she was with him. I confronted her, and though she denied anything was wrong, my suspicions were confirmed when I checked her phone the next day. There was texts, intimate photos, and messages calling him daddy. It was the ultimate betrayal, one that tore my heart out. I knew then that I had to let go to leave her and start over. So for anyone who's struggling, know that you're not alone. Mistakes are part of the human experience, but they don't define us unless we let them. And as for me, I'm moving forward, hoping my story can be a cautionary tale for someone else. A reminder that love, once lost, is sometimes gone forever. My wife and I once made a promise, a simple but powerful vow to be open and transparent with each other. No matter what happened, no matter what we went through, if either of us felt the need to explore something outside our relationship, or simply wanted something new, we promised we would be honest. We agreed to talk things through, to let each other know, to never keep secrets or betray each other's trust. That promise was supposed to be the foundation of our relationship. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for her to break that vow. I discovered she had confided in another man, sharing how thrilling she found his attention during a night out at the pub. She told him details about our relationship, things that should have been between us. When I read those messages, it shattered me. It wasn't just the betrayal of her being with someone else that hurt me the most. It was that she was the one who had reminded me constantly of our promise. She used to say that if either of us ever grew bored or needed to spice things up, we would tell each other. I believed her. You trusted her. That trust was broken. That night, I couldn't even look at her. I went to bed alone and cried myself to sleep, feeling as if everything we'd built had come crashing down. I felt a deep sense of betrayal and sadness that I can hardly put into words. Part of me considered revenge, fantasizing about ways to get back at her. But I held back, choosing to swallow my anger for the moment. The next morning, however, I made a critical mistake. I confronted her without having any concrete evidence. I just couldn't hold it in anymore. Instead of admitting anything, she exploded. She called me insane, accused me of being abusive, and stormed out of the house. Later that day, I found out she had told all of our friends that I was the abusive one. They believed her. Some even created a group chat on Messenger, where they all teamed up to criticize me. When she came home that night, she dropped a bombshell. She was in love with another man, James, and wanted a divorce. I tried to keep calm, hoping we could talk it through, but that only made her angrier. She yelled, insulted me, and when I finally raised my voice in frustration, she called the police. They arrived and told me to leave my own home for the night, so I ended up staying with my sister. The next morning, I returned to find James' car parked in my driveway. They didn't have to say anything. His presence was a clear message, meant to humiliate me. I had no prenuptial agreement, and with her claim of abuse, I knew this could cost me everything. I spoke with a lawyer, but our country's laws don't consider infidelity a factor in divorce, so she was still entitled to half of our shared assets. On top of that, the accusation of abuse wasn't helping my case. She ended things just a few days later with a brief text. After years together, including 4 years of marriage, our relationship ended with a message. Making it worse, everyone in our circle saw James as her rescuer and me as the abuser. My reputation suffered, my career took a hit, and I lost my home. Mutual friends distanced themselves from me, leaving me alone to rebuild a life that now felt foreign. With nowhere else to turn, I moved to a new city for a fresh start. My friend Saladin helped me get a job, one that paid modestly, but was a lifeline in my darkest hours. Though my trust in people had been shattered, Saladin reminded me there were still good people in the world. As for dating, that was out of the question. I didn't feel like I could trust anyone, nor did I have the energy to try. A year later, I heard that Rebecca and James had broken up. James had cheated on her and left her alone with their childish child. He even refused to sign the birth certificate and disappeared, leaving her to raise their child on her own. I felt a bittersweet satisfaction after all she put me through. Seeing karma come around was oddly comforting. Despite everything, I missed her. Against my better judgment, I reached out to check in. She was surprised but responded, and we began exchanging messages. Eventually, we agreed to meet in when I saw her. I barely recognized her. She looked worn down, tired, and regretful. She apologized sincerely, saying she'd been manipulated by James and hadn't thought clearly back then. Though her apologies were genuine, I couldn't ignore that karma had already caught up with her. Yet, for my own closure, I needed more. I told her I'd forgive her if she publicly cleared my name, explaining that I was never abusive. Surprisingly, she agreed, even though it cost her some friends and respect. She then expressed a desire to reconcile and hinted at the possibility of us starting fresh, even asking if I'd help raise her child. I pretended to consider it, suggesting we work seriously toward marriage. By that time, I was already seeing someone new, Lisa, Saladin's cousin, who knew about my past and reluctantly supported my plan. Since Rebecca and I lived in different cities, I told her my job kept me too busy to visit often, keeping her hopeful but distant. I even encouraged her to go to therapy, watching as she seemed to regain some happiness, almost as if she believed in a fresh start for us. As her birthday approached, I set the final stage. I invited her to go ring shopping and let her pick out a ring she loved. Then, on her birthday, I took her to the spot where we were married years ago, a beautiful area surrounded by nature. Lisa was there, waiting to play her part. When we arrived, I introduced Lisa as my girlfriend and, right in front of Rebecca, proposed to Lisa with the ring Rebecca had chosen. Rebecca's face turned pale as she tried to process what was happening. She asked what I meant, questioned our relationship, and finally, realizing the truth, she broke down. I calmly told her our relationship was over, that I'd moved on, and that she was just someone from my past. My only interest had been to help her see the impact of her actions and to get my own closure. She screamed and called me every name she could think of, but it was clear she'd lost her audience. Lisa stood by my side, concerned but understanding. Rebecca eventually stormed off, devastated and once again alone. She tried telling everyone I'd betrayed her, but this time people didn't buy it. They saw her as the manipulative person she truly was. After that day, we exchanged no more words. She sent a final letter expressing regret for everything she had done to me. Her life didn't improve, and last I heard, she hadn't found another relationship. Things with Lisa ended eventually, for reasons unrelated to Rebecca. Some say I went too far, that my actions were cruel. But I only gave her a taste of what she'd given me. I didn't destroy her life. I just exposed her to the reality of her choices. I'm not here to ask for judgment, just sharing my story of revenge. This was in every sense nuclear revenge.